Creativity in business to me is not something that only needs to be beautiful as design. It needs to have functionality because you're trying to achieve something.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for listening in to Good Practice,
where we talk about what makes good creative and good business.
From Stocksy, the artist-led visual media co-op serving the creative economy, I'm Trace Cohen, CEO.
And I'm Genevieve Ross, Creative Director, and we're your co-hosts.
In Season 2, we're asking about the evolving relationship between data and design. We know imagery shapes experience, emotion, and trust. So how are machine learning, automation, and AI transforming how creative works? Today, we're joined by Matt Ingram, dialing in from England, and Melanie Stetter-Hernandez, recently relocated or located to Madrid, both from BCG Design Studios, which is the in-house creative partner of Boston Consulting Group, an entity known well to many of us. The Design Studios team works hand in hand with consultants and clients to bring clarity, imagination, and impact to complex, often global business challenges. Matt and Melanie lead on creative strategy and design efforts across the board, helping global organizations not just solve problems, but communicate in ways that reshape entire fields. To start, a huge welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for showing up today, and would love to just learn a bit about each of you, your role in BCG Design Studios, and maybe a little bit of, either your kind of what your day-to-day roles look like, and a little bit more about how does the studio fit within the broader consulting practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. Well, thanks ever so much for having us here, Tracy. I think kind of in my particular role as a creative strategist, it's really about understanding the business problems that BCG clients have and using design as a principle to help them kind of translate essentially into sort of clear and compelling narratives. We're really about how we kind of align sort of creative solutions, Melanie and I, to really kind of emphasize the business strategy that kind of consultants deliver. And sort of day to day, I guess in my role is really about kind of starting that journey. So digesting kind of the strategy and the challenges that the clients at BCG are facing, and kind of proposing or helping to sort of think about where we can add different elements to really accentuate the different points of the strategy. So it's really sort of digesting and then simplifying into design solutions. And I think that's a kind of great sort of point where then Melanie can kind of jump in and talk about how she kind of carries the baton from there on out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. And I work hand in hand, not only with Matt, but with our consultants in finding creative ways and creative solutions to what they have been working on with our BCG clients for like months. Let's say there is a vision that needs an impactful way of communicating it to the client, and we just think together, what could the story be? What is the main idea? What is the main storytelling? I'm breaking it down to make it as tangible for us. I think that's the beauty of our job, is that I see us as creative partners, but I see us as supporters and of what our consultants do. And I think that allows us actually to use creativity to find solutions or solving other problems that they may have. And I think that is actually the beauty of our partnership, to be honest. It's like they have been working so long for our clients, and the challenges are so big, and they do that fantastic job, and just being like part of it makes our job and our daily life interesting every day.
Matt, I noticed in your background, which is unusual in a creative role, is that you have a strong background in business development, and you don't often see that sort of transition from BD to creative. And I imagine that's stood you in really good stead, in that you really come from a world of having to really, not only on an empathic front, but really dig into understanding the depth of the business problem you're trying to solve, which is sometimes missing in the creative field.
Yeah, most definitely. And I guess if I think back over kind of my past career, I actually originally studied neuroscience. So my background sort of stems from thinking about emotion, human connection, the way in which different parts of the brain are responsible for different outcomes in decision making. And when I kind of started there, I had no desire to work in a lab. So I took that to what kind of drove me, and that was the idea of sort of connection. And a lot of that was to do with how I maybe resonated with brands and other things. So I looked specifically after I kind of finished my academic sort of studies about what kind of businesses were using that in a space that was uh, kind of really impactful to me. And one of the biggest brands at the time, and still is to this very day, was Apple. And that really, the way that they created sort of creativity, but something that almost felt like sexy. How could a phone or a computer have that sort of feel, right? Um, and from that route onwards, I really kind of started to utilize sort of neuroscience in developing marketing. So for the likes of Kantar, and that really lended its way of explaining the data and the ideas of about how the brain worked quite closely to business development. It meant I could really reduce sort of complex ideas into clarity, much like design, to have a real influence with those who are making decisions to come and use our creative services at different businesses I was at.
That's fascinating, especially or the parallel as well with how design breaks down complex ideas into something that's readable, but also taking your background of neuroscience and how the brain actually structures information and responds to things. For just going back a step, just because BCG is known so internationally as a strategy powerhouse, what was the history behind the decision to embed a creative studio into the practice, and how that might have changed the way that decision making is made?
That's a great question. So typically, in the world of strategy consultancy, the standard kind of like form at which strategy is delivered is through the classic PowerPoint template. Um, but I think as creative agencies kind of across the world have shown what's capable and you know in telling stories and building ideas, that's very much something that BCG's wanted to be at the kind of forefront of, is communicating in our strategy in a way that resonates. So the idea of moving away from kind of internal creative teams being production houses, where it's just sort of like translating data into charts, or you know how can we go a step beyond? BCG is always looking to push kind of the boundaries in that world, and they wanted to make sure that we were able to do so, to not only compete but demonstrate the sort of direction that the industry should go in, to aim for the best, and also understanding the impact from a business perspective too. um, Being able to tell stories in more compelling ways, and strategy is a story. We're able to demonstrate kind of more effectively the ideas of BCG consultants, and essentially enable them to not only win more business, but also to do so with more confidence in our clients.
Yeah, it's that's a great sort of anecdote for how creativity is so much like the active translation, where you're taking the strategist ideas and creating something that is going to be more absorbable or more compelling on the other side, and just amplify. the strategy in different ways, unexpected ways that are beyond a PowerPoint. Do you still do PowerPoints?
Yeah, it's still
Yeah.
part and parcel,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't think you can ever replace kind of such a great format. But we're seeing kind of, especially with the outside world, and what's possible even in the bedroom of kind of a budding creative these days, really helping to change the narrative of what is kind of uh, expected, or the potential that is there, and how we can make sure that, even as a global agency like BCG, we're still at the forefront and still pushing the latest and greatest tools and formats, with the experience of kind of the creatives that we have within the studio, all from kind of agency backgrounds, to be able to kind of compound that into what is needed, which is constantly changing.
Yeah. I love this idea. I actually haven't heard that before, that how you define the idea, Matt, that strategy is a story. And I come from a strategy background too. And that just resonates so deeply, because if you can't tell a story with a good beginning, middle, and end, not only is it not going to work, but you're not going to be able to convey it. And maybe Melanie, I could ask you a bit more, as you're obviously a storyteller
Mhm.
in the creative sense. And how did you come to the industry? How did you come to BCG Design Studios?
I'm realizing right now that I found my home at BCG because I have been a creative. I've worked as a creative director, art director. My background is actually media and communications. I worked for a big automobile company in Germany. Previously, I was a communications consultant. I worked always in the realm of like brand experiences, storytelling, marketing strategies, content, comms in general. So one of the um, main synergies that those spheres build is that yes, we need to be creative, but we need to be very strategic. We need to be very functional. Like creativity in business to me is not something that only needs to be beautiful as design. It needs to have a functionality because you're trying to achieve something. So when we say your strategy needs a story, for example, which is a campaign we've been running internally for quite some time now. How did I get here? I think that I always was interested in finding creative ways to get to where we want to be. And BCG is actually the perfect synergy and magic between those two things. Very business heavy, but also very open for being very creative. So we can actually outreach and go beyond and push the limits, which is something that I have learned here. And that goes very well with my values, which is like, don't give up. But there is always a solution. Let's try to be creative, right? Where do we want to get? How do we get there as a team? And yeah.
Thanks so much. It might be a good segue. This season of Good Practice, we're talking to guests about signs of life, exploring where human creativity is still alive and well in 2025, heading into 26, and the intersections where ever finer grains of data and insights connect with instinct and experience. And Matt, we had the delight of having you show up at our Signs of Life Subversively Human event in New York City in September. Would you share any lasting impressions or insights or takeaways from the Signs of Life event?
No, definitely. No, it was a real joy to attend, and I think kind of what really resonated for me at Signs of Life was the idea around sort of connection, and real emotional connection is kind of what really gives creativity its heartbeat. Um, to pull it back to BCG, it's very similar in terms of whether we're speaking to kind of strategists who are going directly to consumer or C-suite or an internal team. It's something that was evident in Signs of Life, and it's the question, uh, the same no matter where you are in the creative industry. It's how do you make someone kind of feel seen, understood and inspired to act, right? So I know specifically, obviously, Genevieve, you gave kind of a really amazing talk around sort of the syntax of attention. Not only kind of the world that's sort of around us, but about kind of what's sort of like right in front of us, I guess you could say. And I think the ambient sort of realism is a real good way to talk about how sort of the imperfections of everyday life add sort of that emotional realism. There's a reason why some of the images kind of that you were showing during your presentation really kind of inspired people in the room. You could see the way that they reacted to them. And, that's something that we often use in our creative work too at BCG to, actually achieve a desired outcome. There's a neuroscientist called Matthew Lieberman, and he talks about what's called the default mode network. And this is sort of like the way in which the brain is sort of socially wired. And it lights up, you could say, when we think about empathy, when we're showing signs of empathy or trying to imagine someone else's kind of perspective. And I think that idea of the Signs of Life conference was really about that idea of lighting up those parts of the brain that underpins decisions in the worlds of business, but it also can create connection, and that can be beneficial in many ways. So I think that was my real sort of take out of Signs of Life. And I think in a world of AI where we can kind of struggling to tell the difference these days between what is real and what's not real, that is a commodity that is going to get ever so more valuable as time goes on.
Correct me if cause I obviously don't know much about neuroscience, but the default mode network was something that did come across some of my reading, which was about connection, but also like connecting ideas, and the aha moment that you have is like this real change in frequency where it's detectable, and it's something that does have this ability to imprint impressions and to kind of grow associations. And so that the role that connecting ideas has to a reaction to something. From in your work, what kind of, because everybody uses such different metrics, what kind of goes into your reading of what's successful in your creative work?
I think kind of the key sort of aspects are about what you could call sort of like decision making sort of fuel, right? So I mentioned previously about sort of the default mode network, which is kind of, the empathy center. But when you perceive something that is truly sort of moving, so that decision maker, there's another part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. And this is what actually like evaluates sort of that emotional meaning. And when you're talking about connection that you just mentioned, it's when those two parts kind of work together is when you get that idea that design stops being decoration and starts to be that sort of decision making fuel. And in the world of BCG, and Melanie, feel free to also jump in here, it's really about the intent at which the clients that BCG has are able to kind of implement that strategy. So impact is measured by obviously claimed perception of the results, but actually doing what BCG measures themselves on is how is that strategy then implemented in real world decision making. The speed at which that happens is a massive signifier at the perceived value of it. Obviously it's not often quite as simple as that, because we're talking about often multi-year strategic planning, but the ability to then invest, showing that financial confidence in that decision making and speed, those will be kind of the biggest successes. But in the short term, it's building that kind of sort of relationship that cements in further support of BCG services to a specific client. So it's that trust, that idea that they can see us as trusted advisors and continue to come back to us to help them tackle problems that they know that BCG is positioned to help them solve. Melanie, did you have anything else you think from your kind of perspective to add to that?
Maybe going a step back or to the side, and as a creative, I look that my work has impact. And as a creative in business, as I was saying before, I want to set before we start a creative work, what is the functionality of it? What is impact? What is the goal? Right? And it doesn't necessarily always needs to be the most beautiful work that actually works, right? And I think that is something that I want to tell our teams, but also like to the outside world. It's like creativity's beyond beauty and aesthetics. And for me, for example, something works if it works for the target group and for the audience, if it resonates, if it has an impact, and if it achieves what we wanted and we set as a goal at the beginning. So there is a whole process that is so interesting because it starts very clear and then in the middle it's a mess and then nobody knows anymore what we wanted at the beginning, and then somehow by having set that structure at the beginning, at the end always it goes well. So if I'm listening to whatever either our consultants or myself or another person is explaining to somebody, and that somebody understands, that somebody feels that's what I am saying, that somebody is getting, okay, that was his intention and I understood that intention, then to me the work is completed and successful. And it's for me always about who is going to listen to me, who is listening, who needs to be listened, what does that person or that group need to understand. And that are those the first questions I always ask myself. For who am I doing that? And I think that is the most valuable part of our work, because it can go wrong very easily if you don't ask your question at the beginning.
Yep. Start with the right question and remember what the question was.
Yeah, exactly. And get lost in the process for a bit and then come back to it.
How much does being such a international enterprise with global work, the challenge, and not in a, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but of understanding how things will translate across different cultural contexts?
I love this question so much.
Great.
I love this question because I'm going to tell you why. Not only at my current job, but also my previous one, I had a global role and I was working with local markets, but with a global strategy. So I encountered many times, this is what we want to say, and this is our strategy. And now I'm going to your country and I'm going to place it. And often it was like very from us, from a global unit, no, this needs to be like that. Like no room or little room to change. Along my career, I've learned, listen to your local colleagues. Listen, guide that, like let them guide you and really understand what is relevant to the culture, what are the values, what are the behaviors, get into it. And I would always say, and again, my background is in marketing, communications, and media, so I have very strategic in that, but understand before you determine and demand in a way to implement. Because they will tell you if they know that you're listening. Otherwise, it's just going to be like, no, this is a story. So we're just going to copy like one-on-one. but it doesn't work. That will never work. And you just have to let go a little bit. And as a creative, say, okay, now tell me what is relevant in your region so I can understand. And together we then form our an identity or creativity. We are creative together by me bringing a global understanding and you bringing that regional touch that we need for it to work. It's collaboration, co-creation for me, 100%. I don't know,
Yeah,
Matt, you see that too, no?
yeah, definitely. And I think emotion is universal, but meaning is what comes from the locality. So I think, and in my time at kind of ad agencies prior to BCG, we often, like Mel suggested, see a global structure rolling out strategy to localize markets, and then they're often kind of lost in translation when there's a veto put down that they have to follow it through. And that's because people perceive design language differently across cultures. I may mess up the name slightly, but there's a Japanese researcher called Shinobu Kituyama, and he looked specifically at the differences between Western and Eastern cultures, talking about how Westerners in creative, whether that's ad, print, or whatever, focus a lot more on objects, so objects of desirability, whereas Eastern kind of participants in his study much more focused on sort of like the relationships and context that objects provided. So more aspirational in what it means to own said thing being advertised or the story that goes on. And it's a nuance, but when you're thinking about it in the terms of a campaign or how you show imagery, it's the difference between doing a product shot or a lifestyle shot, which says a lot about your brand. It says about what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to deliver. And like Melanie said, it's about understanding and speaking to the people within that context to understand those sort of cultural nuances.
Thanks so much. And a question for both of you before we wrap up is that there's no doubt that as creative leaders today, you are both ostensibly futurists and having to look to the future of creative strategy. And we live in a world where tools like AI and automation are further and further embedded in the creative process. Would love your take on how we're talking about these very human element, very human resonant aspects of really what ultimately works or what ultimately creates the shifts that we're looking to create. How does design integrate these tools at scale while keeping human imagination central? Maybe if I could ask you each that question, Matt, Mel.
Sure. Do you want to start, Matt? I know you're
Yeah,
very passionate about the topic. So am I, but I know you a little bit more.
certainly. So I think with AI specifically, I think it gives and empowers people who maybe don't have design skills to bring some of their ideas to life quite quickly, concepting, and being able to help take what previously was part of their imagination to be able to translate it to somebody. And we see that in our field of work. We're all creative, but we're not all designers. And consultants at BCG can often know exactly what they want, but not necessarily the design skills to articulate it or bring it to life. So that really helps us get a sense of what they're trying to achieve or what they want us to do, which is often very, very useful. The second part is the fear that I think a lot of designers and creatives around the world have about it replacing or removing that layer of creativity, that reducing the number of jobs or taking away that sense of creativity as a whole. And I think it can be likened to many sort of industries. Thinking of something kind of close, a piece of my own heart is around music. The ability to sample and pinch other pieces of music to create kind of new things. You could listen to loads and loads of music that's already been created, and still, you could take lots of bits of it to make a new song, but you still need to be musically inclined and know what's good to be able to make it work. And that's very much like AI. The creatives who, say, for example, understand the lens types, understand the shot types, and understand the lighting that is in a fantastic portrait photo are going to be the best people to generate the best portrait AI photos. So there is still the need for the knowledge and the capability of creatives to be able to kind of get the best results out of those tools. And the other thing is that what makes creativity and design unique is, alluding to what we talked about earlier, is that everybody's eye is different. So if we all are using the same creative tools, it becomes homogeneous. We start to see and value much greater the uniqueness of individual creativity that can't be replicated or isn't replicatable by tools. So I can see it also being of even greater value as time goes on. And to supplement the tools, we need more and more creative work to empower the models to continue to create new and interesting AI tools. But there is also the flaws too. And I'm not saying that we will never get to the point, but when we see AI imagery as creatives, we know it's AI. Even something as simple as kind of the human face. The way in which we process it, we can tell it's slightly off. We can tell it's not quite right. The movements, the nuances that make us all kind of human, the way that we sort of, connect with people, with the way that we look at things and the way that we express, the micro sort of mannerisms that humans have in video, for example. And as a result, until we can get those unique sort of identifiers of, or signs of life, you could say, to go back to your conference, I don't know how confident brands are going to be in being able to use that imagery wholeheartedly, because when we see that and they feel slightly off, it underpins our subconscious processing and what we think of those brands, the way we think of it. It will continue to improve and it will continue to get better, but I think we're still going to be in a market that needs the creative input of humans, the uniqueness, even if it is contributing to an ever growing and developing machine. But in terms of time saving, the value it can bring, and the capability, the level of quality that people can get to within a short space of time for the non-creatives, it's a great tool, but it's not a replacement for kind of creativity as a whole.
Thanks so much, Matt. Super insightful.
I'm positive about the evolution and the impact that it's going to have on creativity. I think there is this aspect of democratization that I personally really like. I think technology is enabling many, many people to express their creativity, and before they didn't have the means or the resources. So there is definitely a very positive aspect. I do see the aspect of efficiency that is extremely relevant, not only for, mostly probably not for us humans, but for businesses. And so obviously I see a positive effect and aspect on that. As a human, I am scared about mediocrity and the lack of quality that we will, I think, have at the beginning of, or we are in the next area of AI already. So I do think that we will see a lot of that for a while. And not saying that AI is a trend. Gen AI is definitely not a trend. Everything is here to stay, and it's part of my job. It's become part of my job. I'm just gonna embrace it, and I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna learn how to use it, and I'm gonna keep on learning how to use it. As a human, I'm like a little bit weary, and I think that at some point, as vinyls came back, 2008 and 9, and everybody was playing, buying records again. I do think that as humans, we will always long for authenticity and connection and uniqueness, and knowing, maybe not now, but in some years, we'll be longing for creativity and design that has been generated and created by humans with the help of Gen AI. But still, I think I can see that we will look for that forever. I see that. And I do like that thought, honestly, because we need us, we need to know that this is authentic and this is human and this is, yeah.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for being so firmly planted in the present and so with such a clear path to kind of what we need to be cognizant of and what's possible in the future, for the strong leadership skills that you both bring as creative leaders, for your listening skills in terms of your cognizance of cultures and nuances and our differences, for your academic brilliance and insights that you bring to the work, but most importantly for both of you, for your passion for excellence and impact and doing great work, which is why we all do what we do. And thanks a ton from us here for joining us today.
Thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We hope you'll follow along or subscribe to Good Practice.
Good Practice is brought to you by Stocksy, the internet's first and only artist-owned cooperative stock media agency.